Welcome to your Gemini horoscopes for the last week of March, the 24th through the 30th. We are also entering the shadow period of the Mercury retrograde, which starts next week. And we are going into a full Aries Mercury retrograde, which means that any kind of unresolved issues or situations are going to be a little bit more aggressive than they normally would be, because that's what it takes sometimes to get us off our behinds to do something about the problem. So I can safely say I think that's going to cause some complications and possibly some stubbornness and quite possibly a whole lot of frustration, which is not pleasant. And Geminis, while you don't have any planets to really interact with Mercury, even when the moon comes into your sign, Mercury is 2 signs away, really at the very end. So not a whole lot of interaction going on with it. But because focus is on the inner self, which has a tendency to bring up triggers of situations and feelings, that unresolved issues from the past, this Mercury retrograde is probably going to fuel some of those triggers when it comes up, because focus is on that place, that trigger place, where we start to see situational patterns develop that are rooted in the same thing. So for instance, insecurity, because Vespa is still in Gemini, barely. It is at the very end and about to move into Cancer, but it's still very much there. Vespa is all about security. So if we are talking about triggers around insecurity, that's going to play out in a lot of different situations that bring on that insecurity in some way. The most popular, of course, is marriage and inside our relationships and the securities and insecurities to go on there. But insecurity around money, insecurity around your job, different friends of yours, acquaintances, where you're going to be, all these little insecurities start to come up in your reality, all pointing towards what's the roots of where these insecurities came from. And it can be a very simple thing in terms of where it started, or it can be a massive thing. When it's a massive thing, we definitely want to look at the layers and deal with the layers of that root before we try to pull the whole root out. It really does depend on your level of trauma. In any Pardon me, in any case, how this plays out during the week is that it just feels like a series of triggers, that when you're uber focused on something, the trigger happens and it yanks your focus away from it, and you can't seem to get back to that focus, which is the Gemini way when you think about it. But that's also a very interesting way of thinking about it, because is it something to measure how much trauma is in an individual Gemini, and how much of that those old mindsets and the layers of trauma affect your ability to focus that brilliant mind on something specific? When you start to understand this, you also start to understand where you need to place boundaries, either with people or with yourself. Boundaries on yourself is really important, actually, or with yourself, to eliminate this issue from happening so that you can focus on something and follow it through. It's not that you can't, it's that you have to figure out what is causing the problem so that you can fix the problem in order to move forward and succeed. One of the other things that I feel might be popping up for you guys this week is, I really feel that old situations, old um patterns in relationships or communication patterns are really going to start coming up around you guys in the next few weeks. And most of the time what we see is what everybody else does. We're not necessarily paying attention to what we do on a regular basis. And a lot of times those annoying things that other people do are kind of mirrored back at us to make us understand that we're just as annoying as they are, if that makes sense. So it's really frustrating, obviously, when you look in that mirror, but it's also very freeing because when you understand what you're doing to hold yourself back, you can make the change. It gives you the opportunity to make that change. And then things just kind of sort of start to open up and move, if that makes sense. The bottom line here is that a lot of times, and for most people, when you're in a space where you're being triggered over old stuff over and over again, most people will succumb to that. Most people will take those feelings and create a reality with them by remembering that, oh yeah, I don't deserve to have success. I don't deserve to do this, and I don't deserve to have happiness. But it doesn't have to be that way either. We can have a day or two like that. We're human, it's natural. But if you can put up boundaries around how much time that takes, and overthinking is just part of that problem as much as overfeeling is. If you can put boundaries up around that, if you can give yourself time limits on that, whatever you need to do in a healthy way to work through the situation, the problem, to disconnect from it and let it go so that you can move on to focusing on what you want to get accomplished this week. And the other thing is make sure that your list of things isn't out of reach. This is actually a pretty common problem for most of the Geminis that I know that give themselves this ridiculous list of things that they have to get done in a couple of hours, and it's just never going to happen. In a way, doing that, it's a consistent set yourself up for failure, almost like on purpose. And it's a lot of times we're doing it ourselves, and yet other people are playing into it, so we're blaming them. We obviously don't want to do that either because it's not helping you and it's not helping them. It's most helpful when you see where you're putting those obstacles up around yourself, and a lot of times it's too much going on in here that fuels that fire. So that's what I have for you guys this week. Interesting stuff. But I have to say, as a fellow intellectual, again, I'm not a Gemini, but I am an Aquarius, so we're very similar. That overthinking and overplanning and trying to perfect it is really a huge trauma response for intellectuals. And I feel that a lot of that comes from the fact that when we are children in an environment where we feel like we have no control over our safety and security, this is how we deal with that as children. We come up with an alternate reality that we have control over. And as we get into adulthood, that turns into over planning, over criticizing, over having to have everything be perfect in order to succeed, or we can't do it. So we take the obstacles that we were given as children and we start to give those obstacles to ourselves. It's an interesting thought, and it makes zero actual common sense, but we're not sensible people. We're human. And that makes us very much not sensible people in many ways. And the intellectuals, while we try to think that because we're not as emotional, that that makes us better or different, it doesn't. We do the exact same thing. It's just most of the time it's in here, and we cannot let it go from there, if that makes sense. So that's what I have for you guys this week. If you love your horoscopes, do consider sending a tip or donation through my Ko-fi link in the description of the video. Really appreciate that. You guys are awesome. I'm Melissa Bruce, Heavy Metal Psychic, and I will see you guys next week. And in the meantime, you guys just do what you are best at. And that is to be creative and to be absolutely awesome. The most intelligent people on the planet. Just get out of your own way, and there is nothing that you guys can't do. I'll see you next week. Make it a great week, you guys.